My name's Monk Rowe for the Phillies Jazz Archive, and boy, am I pleased to have Lorraine Feather with me this morning. Welcome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Monk, for inviting me.
I'm going to introduce you as a vocalist, a lyricist, a wordsmith, and I believe a very active creative mind.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say.
Yeah.
I always put lyricist first because I could stop singing but never writing lyrics as long as able.
I believe you did say in something I read that when you found out about being a lyricist and that you could do it,
Yeah.
that was I forget your exact words, but that was the thing. That was going to be your thing.
Did I use the word thunderbolt?
Okay, that may have been it.
Possibly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It was really something. Do you want me to tell you how that happened?
sure.
Uh, so I was in this vocal group called Full Swing that was put together by Richard Perry, at that time a huge pop producer, and Joel Silver, a big movie producer. And they had this idea to have an updated big band with three vocalists in front of it. So they hired me and Charlotte Crossley, who was in Jesus Christ Superstar with me and also was a harlot with Bette Midler, and Steve March Torme, Mel Torme's son. So he was looking for songs for us to record. This is the first time I had an actual record deal, so it was very exciting. And Richard was living a glamorous life, and he had Planet Records and a Studio 55, and wait, was a Studio 54? No, Studio 55. One of them was the nightclub, but so he wanted to go out to Dante's, the jazz club in LA that was very popular at the time, and hear Tommy Newsom's big band. We heard this song called Love Them that Tommy had written. And then we had a meeting with Richard, and he said, I want to have lyrics to that song. I think we should hire a lyricist. And for some reason, I said, oh, I could do it. I hadn't really written lyrics all that much. I had made some attempts at writing kind of quasi pop songs when I was in my late 20s. I was 32 at the time of this meeting. But I had grown up listening to Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross and trying to sing along with my mom. So I knew what it was to write complicated words to complicated pieces of music. And it just seemed like something that would be fun to try. So I said, well, I can do it. And I went, well, okay. So I went home. I wrote lyrics to this Tommy Newsom piece, and I brought them back, and I sang it through for Richard and the other two, and they were kind of quiet. And he said, well, I don't like it at all. it should be completely different. It should be about this, and that. And I was furiously scribbling away. So I went home and redid it, brought it back. He said, yeah, I like it. We'll record that. And I wound up writing lyrics for half the album, but it just came so naturally to me. Not that it was easy, but it was so organic. It was easier than singing. It was easier than anything I'd ever tried to do before. Dancing, which I attempted for many years, acting, which I loved, but never made much of a splash at. And it took over my life from that point onward. I loved it so much.
Can you tell me the name of the tune again? The Tommy Newsom tune?
The title was the Trocadero Ballroom. It was at La, like the opera La Boe. No, actually, it was something else. It was a play on words that was not the same as the opera, but it was something like Love Them. And then it was my title was the Trocadero Ballroom, because Richard said it should be about a ballroom and everybody wants to go there, and it's very glamorous, and they're doing cocaine. Mind you, it was the 80s. Mm-hmm. So that's.
Do you recall if your mother or if your father tried to explain to you what Jon Hendricks and others were doing when they took those melodies that people had improvised and wrote the song, wrote lyrics. Did you understand that at that
No,
point?
no, I was never told what they did. It just was. It was just something that my mom and I used to try and sing along to with not very much success, like Jackie. There's this song about the mouse, um, the Annie Ross song, and everything. It was just so much fun. And I remember meeting John many times. He was a Virgo like me. He always used to bring that up. and I saw him perform. I saw him with Yolanda Bavon, who came after Annie Ross, as you know. And it was just part of my musical life. It was some of the first music I ever glommed onto and thought was fun.
I love that vision. Like, you know, your classmates might have been singing lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, lollipop. And you're singing Lambert Hendricks and Ross.
Tomorrow with you, pretty baby. That was Century. That was one of their slow tunes.
Yes. You know what John Hendricks called your father?
Learned Father.
He told me learned father. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. I'd kind of forgotten that, but when you brought up John, then I realized he was one. And he asked me if I would like to be in his group, a later version of his group, many years later. But it was just he was driving around the country in a car, and it was him and me and Judith, and I think one of the participants, the singers, was going to be Bruce Scott, who did sing with my vocal group for a while. He was really good at all that kind of Lambert Hendricks and Ross stuff. But yeah, I just I never really thought about it, but I heard nothing but that kind of music for years and years. Dinah Washington, and of course Billie Holiday, Peggy Lee, who was my mom's ex-roommate friend, and it was just part of my life. The people who used to call the house were Willie the Lion Smith, and he always introduced himself as Will. Hello, this is Willie the Lion Smith. Can I speak to your dad? And I was 8. I thought he was a real lion at the time.
He was Lion King.
He was. And Andy Razaf, the great lyricist who wrote with Fats Waller.
When you moved to Los Angeles and then you returned to New York, do you recall if your parents were supportive of your intentions for a career in music?
Well, at the time, I was trying to have a career in theater because I had started taking dance lessons when I was 12. My mom, I think she was under the impression that it was cotillion or something, that I was going to make friends and meet people. And it wasn't like that. It was a jazz dance class led by this guy, Carlton Johnson, who was fantastic. He's not with us anymore, but they had a conga player for the exercises, and then they would play Motown music. And I got totally smitten and started taking class constantly. I really didn't have the body for dance, and I started too late. But then that shifted. I went to a Catholic girls' school for just 1 year because my friend was going there, Jerry Southern's daughter, Catherine King. And I didn't particularly care for it, but they were doing an all-girl production of Electra, the Greek tragedy. The lead got sick, and I said, I could do it, sort of like saying I could write lyrics. So well, I think I could do it because I was very good at memorizing, mostly. And so I did it. I played the part, and I can't imagine that I was very good, but my class all stood up at the end. And I've been sort of shy and dorky and didn't really consider myself a popular girl, but it was exciting being on stage and being part of this story. So I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to New York and be an actress. So I switched over to Hollywood High for the end of my high school career. And I started doing after school stuff, and I won an award for some little competition. And then at 18, well, actually 17, I got a little scholarship to study at Circle in the Square, a theater in New York. And then I stayed on when I was 18 and got a waitress job. My friend joined me and got a waitress job. And I proceeded to waitress a lot. And occasionally I would get into a show. But your original question was, do you recall how your parents felt about it?
Correct.
It was like 5 minutes ago, I know. But yes, they were rather upset. They didn't expect me to leave California like that. And it was just upsetting to them that I was so far away. And, you know, you're going to be a cocktail waitress, you're going to be dating musicians and you know, running wild all over New York, all of which was true, of course. And I did get in Jesus Christ Superstar at one point. I did it on the road, and I did it on Broadway. I was in a tour, I was in a regional theater thing, but mostly I just waitressed a lot, something that I was not good at particularly. When I was in my mid-20s, I got a job singing backup for Grand Funk Railroad.
Oh, we're an American band.
Yeah. So that was really fun. I was a funkette.
You're a funkette.
Yeah, in fishnet hose and a leotard and everything.
How did those vocal parts get worked out? How many backup singers were there?
Just two.
Just two. So you sort of did it by ear, or did you have a producer involved?
That's a question. I think we just did it by ear. The other gig I had in that period of time was with Petula Clark in Vegas, and somehow or other I got this job. What happened was I had been waiting around for this acting audition for a showcase that paid nothing. There was a line around the block, and all of a sudden I just went, I can't take this anymore. I had been singing in clubs a little bit, and I went home to my then boyfriend. I said, I'm not an actress anymore, okay? I'm a singer. I can't take it. I just can't. So I've been making some grocery money singing, and I'm going to sing now. So magically, a week or so later, I got this awesome call to sing with Petula Clark in Vegas for a couple of weeks and wear beautiful outfits and be with an orchestra. But the thing is that one of the other singers said, well, I don't really have time to help you through the parts. I'm going to send you all the sheet music. And I don't read. I don't read music at all. I could tell you what key something is in by looking at the sharps or flats, but I don't read. So we got up there, and there was a rehearsal, and there was, you know, the orchestra and the two other women who'd been with Petula for ages. And I just followed along with them like a millisecond behind the other singers until I had memorized the parts. And Petula came up and said, oh, you sound very good.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, she was very sweet.
There's one song of hers that I love so much. It's called I Couldn't Live Without Your Love. And I guess it's the chord progression or something. I appreciate arrangements, and you know, she had good arrangements.
Yeah, she did. It was all top flight. I liked Don't Sleep in the Subway.
Yep.
Yeah, that was good.
Well, the leap from you've made a few leaps.
Yeah.
And before too much time goes by, I want to ask you where your ideas come from, because you've written everything from a song about bats in your apartment to this. I might as well just ask you about this song right now.
Go ahead.
I saw this I saw this song title and Hadron Meson Baryon.
Hadron Meson Baryon.
Thank you. And I knew I'd mispronounced that, but I thought, oh, that's interesting. She wrote a song about a law firm. So, I did some digging, and where did the idea to write about subatomic particles come from?
I don't know where these ideas come from sometimes, but I was reading this book by Walter Isaacson, the terrific writer, Einstein, His Life and Universe. And I was thinking of this episode of Frasier. My ex-husband used to play in the warm-up band for Frasier because it was live. And there was a scene in which Frasier was going on tropical vacation, and his family was there, and his latest girlfriend was there, and Frasier is just being a real jerk. He's complaining about everything, and the girlfriend says, "Come on, Frasier, can't you just relax? Can't you just have fun?" And he says, "Fun? Fun was my middle name in math camp." So I did a little digging, and I found out that math camp is a thing, and that you have to take a qualifying quiz. I don't know anything about physics. I just thought I wanted to do an album called Math Camp. And so I went to various websites like Electromagnetism for Dummies and so forth. And I just picked up certain little words and phrases that I thought were cool. And the way that I wrote Hadron Meson Baryon was that I saw an article that was, I think it was in the Atlantic, reprinted from Quanta magazine, but it was called A Fight for the Soul of Science. And it had a photo of all of these physicists at a conference. And the lead guy is older. He's got his head in his hands, like as if in despair. And the idea was that these people had thought maybe they should just team up with philosophers to try and figure out how it all started, because the search to go ever smaller, and see what is the basis of everything can only go so far unless you have like $1 quadrillion. So they were just in despair. And then I saw these names of the elementary particles, and I thought it was meson too, but I looked it up, Hadron Meson Baryon. And I thought, well, that's kind of a hooky little, that would make a good hook, Hadron Meson Baryon. So I created a little story about a class of people who are in despair, and they're wondering what's at the bottom of it all. And the physicist in the story is a woman, and she goes back and she's with her husband, and it's just, writing lyrics is so much fun. Like I thought, well, they should have a dog. There are more animals in my songs than normal, I know, but what kind of a dog would it be? And I picked out a Maltese mix because I like to support the rescue efforts. Yeah. But from there, it's hard to say. It just kind of evolved or blossomed.
Well, it's pure poetry. I'm going to read I'm going to test your memory. I'm going to read a phrase, and I'm going to ask you to answer with the appropriate phrase.
I'll try.
Okay. To pick the lock that guards the place
of dark and light, and of time and space, or something.
Correct. Like that I could wrap. No, I'm sorry. Where an answer might be found.
That I could wrap my head around.
That's right.
No one's ever asked me in an interview before.
You get to move on to the next round. But I had this really odd image, because about the time I was looking into this song, and I downloaded the piano music, about the same time I passed by one of these big whiteboards that are in Hamilton, just on the walls where students study. And it had that typical, either it was chemistry or it was physics or something, the black writing, the whole board, like this unending calculation.
Yeah.
And then I looked at um, Eddie Arkin's chord changes, and I'm going to read just four of them.
Okay.
A flat minor 6/9 major 7, G 13 sharp 9, G flat 13 flat 9, F minor 6/9 add 11 in a measure of 3/2. So we say these are chord changes, but they also might be the secret of life. I don't know.
Yeah, he'll appreciate that.
It's so how does that come about? When you have a song like this and you write the lyrics, are you already singing it and establishing a melody when you get together with a pianist that you have for them to, and you're going to sing it to them? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it doesn't work that way exactly. I used to write lyrics to existing music at the beginning, old music, Fats Waller, Duke Ellington. That's what I did for several albums. And then when I started writing with The Living, it changed. What I do is almost always I come up with a lyric idea first and I bring it to them. It's a little different with every guy. With Russell Ferrante, I often will send a little phone memo of me speaking to a metronome, the phrasing to the whole song. But it's different with everybody. But usually, like with Eddie, Russell is a virtuosic pianist, of course. Eddie is a great guitar player, but we usually write on piano. So it used to be that I would always go over to his home studio and he would say, well, I have an idea for the beginning, and he'd play some changes and we try out some melodies on my voice. And then sometimes he'd throw it out, but I go like, oh, what was that change? Because I don't, those chord changes that you named, I wouldn't know what any of them sounded like, but I know what I like. Mm-hmm. And so we just kind of worked through it that way. But we've known each other for 35 years now. So we can do it on the phone pretty much. I saw them all a week ago in LA, and it was just fantastic. But we had already been tossing things back and forth remotely for a long time. You know, when you get to know somebody so well that way. And in almost every case, it's lyrics first. And I might have a template, like I'll say, well, what about this? I was listening to this Bach fugue when I was writing this, or this Astor Piazzolla piece, or this Scott Joplin piece. And then that might spark an idea of something around the same tempo, but it never sounds like a sound alike at all.
Talking about writing on the phone, it reminds me of anecdotes I've heard about Ellington and Strayhorn, that kind of the symbiotic relationship they had.
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, Eddie jokes because I've been writing recently, well, like for the last with him, Russell, Shelley, Dave Grusin, and he said, you're like our mutual muse, because most of those guys don't, just at this point, have not been writing songs necessarily, but it's a thing that we do together that
well, that producer that way back with Tommy Newsom was not at all afraid to tell you that, no, I don't like that. And are you able to say that to these pianists and accompanists, that, no, I don't like that?
Well, I wouldn't use those words.
Right.
I feel like, gee, I don't know, but because they all have such a vast trove of harmonies and melodies at their disposal, and a lot of the time they're not sure either. And if they want to tell me they don't like something, they can, or more often it might be something very simple, like I think the song is too long, or I think that we need to repeat this phrase. It's just some kind of a technical issue, and we might change our minds, of course.
There was an interesting moment in your tune, I Love You Guys, where I think it was just the first two lines that you sang. The piano was playing the melody with you. And I wondered, I don't know if it was planned or was it spontaneous, but it was a nice effect. And you don't usually hear it because singers don't usually want that. Do you recall that?
Yes, I had forgotten, but you're right. It is a nice effect that we use sometimes. And I might sing in unison with Charlie Bijrat, the violinist, or with the pianist. In that case, it was Shelley. I know that at the beginning of that tune, he wanted it to be about journeyman musicians who were doing all of these gigs, and a lot of them were horrible. And he wanted to sound like he was kind of in a lounge overplaying.
Oh, yeah.
But we had a lot of fun. I really like it. Oh, and then there's a line in I Love You Guys. I love it when you take it round the bend together, then you suddenly mysteriously end together. And Shelley said, okay, so it should just be complete chaos. And then all of a sudden you suddenly mysteriously end together. And everybody got a kick out of that because it's part of their lives. So, and I also put a thing in there about a 7-stroke roll. Your license plate is a 7. I've dated a ton of you, married one of you. His license plate was a 7-stroke roll. That was just a little nod to my husband of almost 30 years, Tony Morales. Mm-hmm. Although I believe my ex-brother-in-law is the one who has the 7-stroke roll on his license plate. But it's an inside drummer thing that most people wouldn't know. But I like to make the guys laugh.
That's an interesting thing to think about. Inside, have you ever had your music playing with a small group of people and you're there, and some of these lyric things you do come up? Do you watch these people to see if they're sort of chuckling at the parts that you hope they chuckle to?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I haven't been performing in some time because I've been more focused on writing lyrics and doing my own projects. But I notice that in the audience, and you have to think about whether or not you want to put a little interlude after something that you consider funny, just so that the beginning of the next line doesn't get drowned in laughter.
Wow, almost like a comedian.
Almost like a comedian.
Yeah. The recordings I've listened to are. I'll relate another thing I remember reading. Milton, the bassist, talking about recording sessions with Dinah Washington, and the quartet would get there ahead of time and sort of run through the tunes, and then she'd walk in and say, okay, what do we got? And she would do one take and consider it done. So this long intro to my question is, how do your arrangements occur, which are quite precise at times?
Well, the composers are the arrangers, and some of what they do is very precise and meant to be played as written. And then there are other spots that are left loose because they know the personality of the people who are going to be on the session in most cases, and they want that person to be able to play a little solo or to do something that has a certain vibe, but they don't dictate exactly what it is.
Are you in a booth singing with the group usually, or do you sometimes sing after the fact?
Well, I mean, I have sung along many times with them, but I consider it like it's not a natural process, so to speak. It's like making a film. You put the pieces together, and I generally sing after the fact. And of course, I do a lot of vocal harmonies that often I will record the pads, the vocal harmonies that I'm singing with myself ahead of time. And also, I do these talking sections, as you've noticed probably. And I'll do that ahead of time too, because when the band comes in to play, it brings them into the atmosphere of the tune. Kind of like the harmonies are such a big part of the feeling of the story that I've discovered that it's nice to do them first. And it's also nice to do them first for me singing the lead.
Are you a person who has trouble knowing when things are done?
Yeah.
Either your own lyrics or a recording?
My own lyrics, not so much. I pretty well know that they're done, although what happens is that I never just sit down and hammer away until something is done. I'll have an idea, and then once I'm in the head of writing the song, the lyrics, it floats through my consciousness all the time, and things come up. I'll find little internal rhymes and rhythms and alliteration and just words that I want to use instead of other words. But once I finish it, it's pretty much done. I'm not rigid about it, but singing wise, I do have trouble knowing when it's done. Like I'll go like, I don't really like the way I sang. Like, no, it's fine, Lorraine. But no, it's fine. Once I was doing this album called Tales of the Unusual, and I wrote lyrics to Nino Rota's Juliet of the Spirits theme called Rosa Orata. Russell arranged it for me. It's mostly in harmony. And then there's this little one talking part where it's a woman in the circus, and she says, "Look at all the people out there tonight, darling. I think we have a full house. I'm so excited." I was working at the time with Carlos Rosario, the engineer, producer, who did a lot of my albums and is wonderful. And every time we listen to that back, he'd laugh. He said, it's just so funny the way you said that. I said, well, let me do it again. He went, no, I refuse to let you do it again. So yeah, I'm not sure a lot of the time if I'm done or not vocally.
Yeah. The collaboration you did with Stephanie Trick was pretty amazing. Is there any plans for more of that?
Well, no, not right now. And I miss Stephanie a great deal. Performing with her was just fantastic. We had a multimedia thing going that her late father had put together with lyrics on a screen. And then there's a little cam on Stephanie's flying fingers. And we had a video and various pictures of James P. Johnson, Fats Waller. But that was a moment in time. We just became fans of each other through mutual friends. And we got together. We thought it would be good to do a gig. And then we thought, well, let's do an album. And I had used up so many Fats Waller tunes on my own Fats album that we tried to concentrate on James P. Johnson. But Stephanie, who was, I always forget how old she is, but she looked like she was 12 at the time when I was working with her. She was so young. But she knew all of this old James P. Johnson stuff and Willie the Lion Smith and some other composers I'd never heard of. There was a guy named Robin Frost who wrote something called, I think it was Robin Frost, Greased Limelight, that it was written for to be played by a computer because it was pretty much unplayable, but Stephanie played it. And I wrote lyrics to it called it Let's Do This. And so she was just this amazing trove of information about music. I mean, Fats Waller died before even I was born. And Stephanie she was just, created to do this. So we did the album, and we did some gigs together that were super fun. I would say it was maybe the most entertaining musical performance I've ever been part of. And her husband, Paolo, is Alderighi is a fantastic player, and then they would do a thing together. It was just like huge fun. It's very hard to remember all those lyrics. I really don't drink it all anymore, but at the time I did a bit, but I never before that show because it's intense remembering all of it. But yeah, I'm just crazy about her, and I would like to work with her again and perform with her again.
Wow. That's sort of a specialized genre, but over the years, can you articulate what makes for a valuable piano accompanist?
Well, because I do songs that were already arranged by the composers, it's not necessarily an issue, because the usual answer to that would be someone who doesn't overplay, someone who doesn't rush. But I have performed almost exclusively with the guys who wrote the music, so it just doesn't come up. With Russell, with Shelley, and with Stephanie, of course. So it's completely natural. It's difficult to do it with another person. Songs that I might not think are terribly difficult, I tried to do them with players that everyone said, oh, this is the best guy in such and such town. And it would be someone who's great, but he'd go like, this song is just almost impossible to pull off. I don't know if I can do it. So it's kind of challenging.
Are you mostly pleased with what jazz critics write about your work and you? I'm going to give you one that just I spotted in a review, Jazz Times. Intellectual jazz lab dedicated to the dissection of the human condition.
Was that for math camp?
Yes.
Sounds like a math camp review. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, nobody likes getting slammed, but for the most part, I've had some very very interesting things said about me. My favorites are by people who are not critics, like Dave Frischberg and Alan Bergman. But yeah, I can see that. Sure.
You seem to be very attuned to good grammar and punctuation and why?
Why?
I mean, that's everybody should be, right?
My father, basically.
From your father. Uh-huh.
But that's the short answer. My father, I remember when I was waitressing, he said that it's creme de menthe, Lorraine, not cream de menthe. I said, Daddy, that's not the way that the other waitresses pronounce it. And he said, and you should say lingerie, not lingerie. Why that came up, I don't remember. But nobody says lingerie. It was an English speaker. And he was an expert in the English language, and that was the only subject I was ever good at in school. Really, I was terrible at history, geography, chemistry, but I loved diagramming sentences. And I'm not saying that my grammar is perfect, my English is perfect, it's not. But yeah, I got that from my dad. And I'm happy that we had that in common. He called me once this is shortly after I got married. He was laughing so hard he almost couldn't talk. He said, "Lorraine, I saw this anecdote. I won't tell you who the actor was. This interview with TV actor in TV Guide, and he said he had taken up directing, and he said one day I was sitting at my desk and I felt the desire to act literally drain through my fingertips, literally."
I can see how that would get to your father.
It did.
You know, I have his, in case you notice, I have his early book strategically placed over my shoulder. And
Oh, nice.
yeah,
I can't see them, but thank you for telling me.
yeah, that was a gift for me. I think a high school graduation. And when I look at it now, it's really lovely to read, and it's quaint because he included addresses of people.
Right. I remember when he was putting that encyclopedia together, he and I were Gittler, there was this massive dining room table we had that my parents kept for decades. And all of these biographies were strewn all over them. It was quite an undertaking considering that these musicians were all over the world. Some of them were not very good about getting back to him for one reason or another. And it's really kind of amazing that he did it and got as much information as he did.
Yes, and it's informative to read now to what he chose to write about people back then in the 60s. And we know them now from their whole career after that, but we sometimes forget what they did when they were young men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so magical in a way, the way my dad arrived on the scene exactly when he did, because everything was happening. And he was friends with Charlie Parker. I'm staring across the room at my dad's book, Inside Bebop, framed, and it's autographed to Leonard, my best friend, Charlie Parker.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
The fact that he was British, correct?
Yeah.
Do you think that some of the African American musicians thought of him differently, even though he's white, but he was British, that maybe he didn't bring any of the prejudice that was so apparent at that time?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I believe they did think of him differently for that reason. He was first entranced with jazz when he listened to West End blues, Louis Armstrong's West End blues in London, and then when he came over to the States and he was able to meet him, he was so bowled over that these people he admired treated him with such friendliness, and he was shocked. I don't know what the situation was at the time in London, but my dad was horrified at the racial prejudice in the States, and became active in the NAACP when I was, I think, in my teens. But it just, it was horrible, and it was such a short time ago, you know, just awful. So yeah, I think that they might have trusted him a little bit more.
Did you become aware? When did you become aware that your name had significance? I'll just leave it at that. That they chose to name you.
Oh, my first name's
Yes. Yes.
Billie Jane Lee Lorraine. Well, I was called Billie or Billie Jane for the first few years of my life, and for some reason, I think I didn't like Billie and Feather together. And I said, I want you to call me Lorraine. They gave me 4 names. Apparently, and I didn't even realize this until somebody sent me a letter my dad had written to this person's dad way back in the day, saying that there were a lot of arguments about my name, and that's why they wound up giving me 4. But it was, Billie for Billie Holiday. When my mother was pregnant, Billie Holiday said, "Oh, I want to be the godmother." So of course, they wanted to have that connection, and they called me Billie. Jane for my mom, Lee for Peggy Lee, and Lorraine for the song Sweet Lorraine. So I guess it just dawned on me slowly why they called me all those things. But I've been Lorraine since for a very long time. There are a few people who call me Billie, but almost nobody.
Have you ever thought about trying to write a lyric about that?
No.
Well, I think you should think about it.
Okay. I'm gonna put it on my long list.
The long list.
Stop it.
Like the long list you waited in that made you decide to not be an actress anymore.
Line around the block, and it paid nothing.
Yeah. Oh, that's paying some dues right there.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever thought about being political in your lyrics?
No. I could. I have strong views, but it just for some reason didn't seem like a good fit. There are other people who do great political satire, and I don't know. It just didn't. It just didn't ever come into my head as a compelling thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes those kind of lyrics don't date well either.
Right.
It's like your song now has a short shelf life, so to speak.
Yeah. Who was it who did Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, and Dean? It follows a pattern, if you dig what I mean. Who was that?
Oh, you stumped the band.
H2O Gate Blues or something?
Oh, okay.
I have to look it up.
Now on your website, there's sort of a blog about Miss English and her pet peeves.
Oh,
Yes, it's very fun reading.
well, I haven't updated it in a long time because I feel as if maybe it is dated. I know so many people now who are upset at apostrophes being used to pluralize. Somebody posted about it on Facebook just the other day. It was forget what kind of a store it was, but let's say it was Wayman's, and then it said, couches, chairs, tables, each with an apostrophe, and they didn't use an apostrophe for the possessive of the actual name of the place. And I chimed in. I said, yeah, in LA, there's Ralph's grocery store, and I complained internally about it for many years, not having an apostrophe. And then I found out that the founder's name was something like Edward Ralphs with an S. So you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Miss English. They're just I don't know. There are so many people who are aware of that. But I have a couple of musicals that I have worked on with Nan Schwartz, a wonderful composer in LA, and one of them is called The Grammarians. It's based on novel by Kathleen Shine about 2 identical twins who are obsessed with grammar. So I hope that we can finish that sometime, because I really like I really like writing songs about grammar.
If you had a blank check, sort of following up on what you just said, what's your dream? Do you have a dream project that someone else funds?
A blank check? You mean like even $100 million would be okay?
Well, that's a pretty large check. Maybe just.
I need to know. I need to know, because I do have a project in mind, but it might be pretty expensive. Maybe 50 million. Well, can we not put a dollar amount on it?
Sure.
Okay.
It's blank.
Okay. An animated musical, jazz musical. That would be my dream. And I could use all the incredible singers and musicians I know. And I'd sing on it too, but that wouldn't be the main point. And I could write things with my co-writers. I could also use some old music, the Fats Waller and Duke Ellington things I've done with lyrics, or do some more. You have to put aside some money for a legal team, because the rights to those things are always a little bit difficult to attain. But yeah, that would be my absolute dream.
All right. I'll keep my eye out for some funding for that. Let me run a couple names by you that I believe you've worked with.
Okay.
Dick Hyman.
Oh, well, Dick Hyman was my parents' friend when we were back in New York. I knew him a little bit, Dick and Julia, but when I was living in Northern California, and my dad had passed away, and I was going through a lot of CDs and reissues in the garage to help my mom decide what to donate. And I came across this Fats Waller double CD called Turn on the Heat. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. My parents hadn't played much stride music because it was too old fashioned for them. But I just loved it. I used to drive around in my Volkswagen Beetle with a CD changer, listen to it over and over and over again. And I was writing at this time lyrics for cartoons, but I wasn't employed at the time. And I thought, I want to do something kind of challenging and fun. So I wrote lyrics to something called Smashing Thirds and entitled it Saison. Or actually, it had a different title at the time. It was called No for an Answer, because it was about how everyone gave the painter Saison, they all told him no until he was, pretty much dead. And I sent it to Dick Hyman because he's the stride guy, and I thought he might get a kick out of it. I put some live musicians around it, and I used the Fats Waller sample. So Dick Hyman calls me up, and mind you, I really didn't know him at all, except just vaguely. And he said, all right. He said, you have to do a whole album of these stride piano pieces with your lyrics, because who else is going to do it? He said, and I like it because he says, it's like Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, only the music is much older, even much older. He said, and I'll plan it, but I don't have time right now. So find somebody else. And then when it's time, and he began sending me all of these stride pieces. And I just kept going. And about 2 weeks after this, my mom passed away. And Dick called again. He said, you need something to do right now. Just keep working on the album. So I worked with Mike Lang, who sadly, Dick Hyman at 96 is still sounded great. When I talked to him a few weeks ago, Mike Lang, the pianist in LA who was helping me on some of this, has sadly died. But he kind of got me started. And then I went to Florida and finished up with Dick. And we did a few gigs together. But it was just incredible, because he just kind of just told me to do it. And and I thought it would be fun, so I did it.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah.
He's something else. He is capable of just about anything, I guess.
And he's so modest. He's funny and dignified and wry, and it's just one of the most admirable people I've ever met.
How about Bela Fleck?
I don't know Bela Fleck. I heard something of his. I was just looking around on Amazon for music when I was writing this album called Ages, and I heard a tune of his called Circus of Regrets, I believe it was. I got in touch with him somehow or other. I wrote words to it and called it Peculiar Universe. And I made a little recording of it in my home studio, Tony's in my home studio, and sent it to him. And whoever it was who managed him said, well, he usually doesn't agree to things like that, but he said yes. And I asked him if he'd play on it, which he did while he was on the road. And it was on my Ages album. But I've seen him perform. I love him, but I've never actually met him.
That's so interesting this day and age. I guess that's like exchange of sound files,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right.
Gee, how do you charge for your work? If you are writing lyrics for a cartoon or some Disney thing, there's the musicians union. Is there a lyricist union?
No, sadly, there is not. I have an agent in the UK, Maggie Rodford, and if something like that comes along, then she negotiates it. Eddie and I wrote something for the Warren Beatty movie, Rules Don't Apply, which was named after a song after we wrote it. It was unfortunately a terrible flop, but it was exciting to do. And at the time, we made a deal to write it, and also I had recorded the song, and they had an option to use my version, but they decided just to leave Lily Collins' version as the closing title. So yeah, it's just a thing that somebody negotiates for you if you have someone to do that, which I do.
Are you an optimist?
Yeah, I am. I think I've said many times, I believe the best part of life can come at any moment.
Nice. And when we wrap this up, do you have a project that you will turn to that's sort of in the works?
I have a couple of things in the works. Well, I'm doing a new album, which is called The Green World. And I have about half of the songs almost done, not recorded, but written. And I'm working on something that I shouldn't say the title yet because I'm not entirely sure, but Bill Elliott, who used to have a big band when I was in LA and had written a couple of songs with me, was working with the soprano conductor Barbara Hannigan, who's this just extraordinary, eccentric woman who sings opera and conducts. She won the Gramophone Award for Artist of the Year last year. And Bill was going to London to record an adaptation he did of John Lithgow's book, The Remarkable Farquhar McBride, retitled The Remarkable Sparkle McBride for Barbara. And he had room for something else. So he said, maybe we should write something. And actually, no, what happened was I called him. I said, you still working with Barbara Hannigan? Because a mutual friend of ours had said, you and Bill should write something for Barbara. And I happened to call him exactly as he was sort of thinking about that. So we wrote a 15-minute piece based on Catherine Manfield's short story Bliss, which is about a young woman who falls in love with another woman in her social circle. It's got a surprise ending. It's very dramatic, was perfectly suited for an opera. And we recorded it and videotaped it with the BBC orchestra and Barbara conducting and singing. And it came off really well. So we're working on something else, Bill and I. And those are my two main projects right now, although there are some others kind of in the wings too.
Do you have a work pattern? I've often read, they're talking about authors and composers, that you have to have a routine. You have to write something every day, even if you have no particular impetus or inspiration, you just have to keep writing. Do you find that is true?
Not exactly. There are days when I don't write, but if I have songs in progress, I like to go visit them on any given day and maybe change a thing or two. I'm not super disciplined that way. I start in the morning. If I begin a song in the morning, a lyric, I can work on it into the night. but I would never, almost never start anything at night or in the late afternoon. I like to be hopped up on caffeine and in a certain mental condition to begin writing a lyric. But then if I go out walking, or when I used to have a garden, if I'm outside gardening, it just it just, yeah, sort of courses through my mind the whole time. And that's how it happens. I don't consider it like a real job, although on any given day I might get up and go, okay, I'm going to work on such and such today, and I'll just do it all day long. Or if, for example, Eddie and I are working on the title tune for the Green World album, we'll call and we'll talk through something, and we'll figure out a little section. We'll try out certain things on my voice, or we'll work out harmonies. And then he'll go, okay, I'm going to program this. I'll call you back. And I'll go, okay, I'll go have a sandwich, or talk to my cat, or do any other thing. And then it goes on and off all day. So I wouldn't say I have a schedule, but I don't let months go by without writing ever. Like, I can't do that.
Do you walk around your apartment reading your lyrics, trying them out?
Yeah, I do. I sing through them a lot. Sometimes I put on my noise canceling headphones and I'll sing through something with one ear slightly off, and that's what happens when I'm working on an album. I sing through everything constantly and until I'm done.
Nice. To wrap up, I'm wondering if your parents lived long enough to see your path come to fruition.
My dad came to some gigs at which I was doing all my own songs, and he got a huge kick out of it, because people would come up to him and say, "Oh, Leonard, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." He was a huge supporter of my lyric writing ambitions. And in fact, when he was in the hospital in Encino, Tarzana Hospital, and very sick, I remember him saying, did you send Cleo Lane your Ellington, your Ellington redos, because she's doing an Ellington album with Mercer Ellington. Did you send them to her? And I was able to go, yes. She got back to me. She's recording a couple of them. He cared a lot about my writing, and we went to ASCAP meetings together. He was very proud of me. But when I got my first Grammy nomination, I cried a bit, because I wished they could have seen that. It would have been exciting, even though my dad had something of a jaundiced view of awards and ceremonies, but he would have been so proud.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your career, and this has been a really fascinating conversation.
Oh, for me too.
Thank you.
It's never to quiz me.